Go me for remembering. Okay, so welcome everybody to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining once again. We've been doing quite a few webinars, and it's really nice that so many people are interested in the material. So I really do want to say thank you for coming. Today's webinar is on language etiquette and communication. Yes. This webinar is being recorded. You will receive it 72 hours after this session to watch back at your pleasure. So just a bit of housekeeping. You would have seen on the slide before that everybody is muted, everybody's video is off. If you have any questions to ask, I would appreciate it if you stayed away from using the chat box. Because of my access requirements and Sarah's access requirements, it's a lot easier for us to be able to look at the Q&A from the Q&A box. So if you do have anything you'd like to comment or ask, we will get to your questions and comments at the end. And if you can write them in the Q&A box rather than chat box, that would be really nice. And I will ask, Sarah and I will both look at these, but I will ask Sarah to kind of have a look as the questions come up. And then at the end, we will look through your questions and answer them. So just a brief overview of what we will be covering. So we're going to do introductions, an overview of celebrating disability, but also I'd love to hear a little bit about cerebral inclusion and what Sarah does. So why it's important to consider language etiquette and communication when engaging with disabled people. We're going to talk a little bit about active engagement. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to ask questions and the ways to ask questions to elicit the honest, open answers that you are hoping for. We're going to have a quick look at bias in quite a few different forms. And then we've got some, if you've been here before, you will know that we always ask, we always offer next steps for you to think about in the future. So we've got one that we're going to offer you today. And then at the end, if you have any questions, please do ask. That would be great. So Sarah, while I'm getting rid of this screen, would you like to start by introducing yourself and your business?
Happy to. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah Burrell and I run my own inclusion consultancy. I train and provide strategic guidance and consultation around inclusion. I also host a weekly digital support group for Let's Stay Connected to help and assist people through this time. I'm also a guest in essays webinars quite a bit, so I'm grateful for that. So I'm Sarah, and I have a speech impairment, so please do holler on the Q&A if you don't understand what I've said. Please do ask me to repeat it. I think it's really important that we learn to do that more, because actually it adds value to a person being understood. So I don't know where essays is for everyone right now, but that's what I do. Essie, are we ready to go?
Yeah, we're good to go. Absolutely. So I am Essie Hardy, and for those of you who've been here before, you'll know. For those who are new to this, you will know that I run and own Celebrating Disability, which is a disability inclusion business. So a little bit like Sarah, I support businesses to be inclusive of disabled people. And that can be disabled people as employees working within the business, or disabled candidates that would like to be part of that business or organisation, or also as disabled customers who want to engage and interact and buy products and services from your business. And by doing that, I do that in a way that I offer training, both virtually and live, if you can actually remember what live training looks like. I also offer consultancy advocacy and auditing as well. And as you said, as Sarah very well said, I also run these webinars with co-hosts like Sarah, who I think is really good, and other people as well. So on Friday, I have a co-host, Sarah Taisha, who is going to be helping me to deliver a webinar on the accessible and inclusive environment. So if you want to figure out how you can support the growth of that, please come along and join us at the same time on Friday. Okay, thank you very much. So to begin with, we're going to talk about language and etiquette and why it's important, what are the benefits of getting it right when we talk about language and etiquette around disability. Sarah, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, of course. So I think that language takes a real precedent, and how we perceive language is really important too. And I think that the language and the structure of language we use is vital to how we are perceived and we come across. We can all benefit from language being positive, and we can all benefit from engagement being active and open. And our etiquette and micro behaviours can influence a lot on the impact on others, especially those with disabilities. And I think that's very, very important to address language as an issue.
I completely agree. And I mean, I think throughout the time, throughout time, I mean, I won't go back centuries, but even if you think about over the last couple of years, the engagement and the language we use when we talk about disability and we discuss disability, either within our own organizations and businesses, but also the language that we see being utilized in the media and everything, really kind of impacts positively or negatively on what we think about disabled people, and impacts on our unconscious, on our biases of disabled people and on those stereotypes. So, I mean, I think the idea behind why language is so inclusive for me anyway is that we want to, as my business says, we want to celebrate disability, and the only way we can do that is to promote positive language, to show disability is something positive that can be valued and can add so much into society. So we want to always be aware that the language that we're using and the ways we communicate with people is engaging and is promoting that disabled people are able to achieve where they want to achieve. So we want to talk to you a little bit about utilizing active engagement and what active engagement actually is. And Sarah, please, come in and add anything to this as I talk as well. So when we talk about active engagement, what we really mean is we want to make sure that whenever we're doing anything, we want to engage the people that we're doing it for in the journey. And I hear a lot of times through Celebrating Disability and the work that I've done previously that, oh, but Essie, we've tried to engage disabled people, but nobody's talking to us. We don't get the answers. But it's about engaging people in the right way. If people aren't engaged in the right way and engaged in a way that they understand what they're going to get out of it and what the benefits are for them, then they're not going to. And I think that comes back to the language we're talking about. If you don't utilize the right terms, and utilize terms that people can relate to and is tangible so that they can see that actually we are talking to them, then people aren't going to engage. And we need to also, when we are actively engaging with people, we need to show the process. So for example, today when we were introducing this webinar, I went through, what we're doing, who's here, why there's somebody here without the screen turned on, and what we're going to be doing in the session. Because you want to know, why you've signed up to this webinar and what you're going to get out of the hour, and you don't want any kind of unusual shocks that you weren't necessarily waiting for. So it's important for me as the host or the person that's engaging for you to be open and transparent as much as possible, so that you know what you're getting, you know when you can ask questions, you know what's going to happen as a result, and therefore you're more likely to come and interact and engage with me in the future. And I think it's exactly the same when we're talking to our disabled employees, either to see how they're doing in their workplace, either on a whole with the employee body, or a single employee, or even our disabled customers. It's important to know how they're getting along, how a new service or product can be designed in the future to fit their needs, because at the end of the day, if you design something that fits people's needs, then they're more likely to buy it. I'm not going to buy anything that I can't use or I don't care about. So I if I'm involved in the process, or other disabled people are involved in the process, they're more likely to engage with the use of that product in the end. Would you agree with that, Sarah?
I would indeed. And I think that this is a very delicate, it can be delicate, and we understand that we do not know everything. And it's okay to admit that. And actually, when we admit we don't know, we become much more of a recipient to what's being said. And active engagement, particularly active listening, requires you to actually drop your own agenda and fully listen to what has been said. And this is something that is very difficult to do. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but in a round robin, for example, in a massive room with 20 people or 100 people, and when you're told to introduce yourself and say something about you, that in itself can cause a lot of fear and angst. And actually, what comes out of that half an hour isn't much, actually, if we are all in a state of nervousness. Because actually, even after we've said what we do or how we do it, we have an endorphin release of calm, which can also distract. So by carefully utilising language and behaviour, we can respond and not react to issues like that. And actually, maybe someone has a preference to not speak and to have someone speak for them. We need to ask the right questions in order to get there. And these questions are so vital for building knowledge, for building awareness, for building up our knowledge to be confident in communication. And so by asking how you best communicate, we can get an answer we can use, rather than assuming we all want to engage in one format, which may be fear-evoking or anxiety-evoking and actually impact negatively on performance. So by asking that simple question, how best do you communicate, or how would you like to communicate, is a goldmine.
I think so. I completely agree. And I think I've just got two things to add to that. And Sarah, please accept my apologies if you've already said this. I was responding to something in the chat. So if I missed what you said while I was responding, I do apologise. Sarah knows abundantly well that I am absolutely awful at multitasking. Just can't do it at all. So yeah, I just wanted to add two things to what you were saying, because I completely agree. So first of all, I think that, it's so important, as Sarah says, that we find individuals' preferences when communicating. And I think sometimes we have to be mindful that those preferences fluctuate and they change. So if you talk to me today, I might say, well, my communication method is to talk to you via a computer, because that's the only thing I can do at the moment. But usually I would say, well, my communication method is to talk to you face to face, where we sit down and have a coffee and a chat. Equally, I might, depending on, what's going on for me in the day, I might say my communication method is over the phone. phone, or my communication method is writing an email. I prefer to write you a list of things that I feel rather than coming along to your meeting. So these are just a few examples of the way people communicate, and there are a few of the obvious ones. There might be some very less obvious ways that people like to communicate depending on how they're feeling and what's going on in their life. The other thing I was going to add to what Sarah says was also when it comes to disabled people, those communication methods might be slightly more unique than it might be if you're communicating to your non-disabled audience. Obviously your disabled audience is part of that non-disabled audience, but it might be something extra that you need to think about. So by utilizing the experiences of the disabled people you either have in your team or are willing to engage with you on this topic in the first place is really helpful. After having a few ideas, it might be even worth kind of giving people some options. So when, not that you would just come out with what are your communication methods necessarily, but when you are having that conversation, you might want to give some examples of what's available. So again, for example, I have in my webinars, when you register, it asks about your access requirements. So somebody recently came forward and said that they would like closed captions. So I worked out how to put closed captions in. Somebody in a webinar before came forward and said they would like me to send them a hard copy of any material that I was going to send out to people because it was easier for them to access. So I'm creating a list of access requirements that people are going to ask for. So in the future, I can use that example list to give people examples of what is available, but also making it very clear that it's not an exhaustive list and there's something not on there that people would like to see, please come forward. I think it's also very important to communicate that, we might not be able to do it immediately. Luckily, I already worked with Take Notes, so I was able to very quickly work with them to put closed captions on, and now I'm going to be using them as standard. But it might also be the case that it's not something that I'm able to do immediately. And that's fine. It's the way that I communicate that to my participants, to say, I really want to help. Unfortunately, I can't do 100% right now because of, whatever's restrictions. However, this is what I'm doing in the future. This is what I'm doing in order to accommodate at the moment. And I would really love your feedback and your support to help me improve it in the future. I think transparency, and I'm sure you agree, Sarah, transparency is one of the most important things, as most people will understand that we can't have everything ready for people at once. People just want to know that you're working towards it and that you have the right idea so that they feel valued and that they're more likely to actually help you and work with you rather than go somewhere else.
I mean, and just to add to that point, I think that when we do open up that conversation, we are actively trying to co-create and empower people to do things their way in the way they do it well. And this creates an optimization of how well they perform and they perform to their full potential because they are empowered through tools. But attitude and language help us get there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that leads very well on to Sarah. I keep putting you on the spot, I realise, but you're very good at I'm sure you'll get me back. But you're very good at it anyway. But that leads us on to really well onto how we ask the questions. I mean, we've talked about how it's so important to ask the right questions in the right way. But, I think you can start us off, if you don't mind, by kind of talking about how we ask the questions to people.
So I think what we need to talk about here first is the elements we want to get out and actually what we want to achieve, because actually that's a very directive force. And I think that often the result of that question is to learn more about someone and to create a trust and a rapport so that future engagements are easier and accessible and feel comfortable. So that is one way of lowering the guard, engaging with more people within your organisation, and getting true feedback and improvement to your organisation. If you don't have that trust and transparency and someone who's accountable for that, you don't actually get very far. And so how we ask the questions and structuring a question is so important. I'll start with a simple example. So as opposed to asking, are you okay? Which actually is a very simple question, of course. But you rarely, unless you know, you rarely hear, oh no, I'm not actually. You hear, yeah, I'm okay. Because it's an easier, faster route to the answer. When you ask, how are you doing today? It has no repercussion on the answer. And that amount, the little difference there can emote trust and rapport. And you end up building a much more holistic image of a person and what they need and what they want by doing that. And we can do this and help reduce the bias through asking these type of questions. And we often experience bias throughout our day. And I'll go on to my next point, Effie.
Awesome.
Where I am in the
absolutely, yeah.
To go on to talk about bias and the impact that language and etiquette and behaviour have on the impact they can cause and the results that can happen. So I'll just get my little spiel up for myself. Forgive me, 1 minute please.
Well, whilst we have that interlude, can I just add what I feel about what you were saying before?
Definitely.
For me, the question, are you okay, reminds me of ça va, for the French, ça va? And it doesn't actually mean I want to know how you are. It's a greeting, isn't it? As we go past. And I mean, I live on a street where, there's a lot of, it's a bit like EastEnders on the street I live. It's brilliant. You don't need to watch TV ever. But there's a man who's really lovely and he walks past and he always goes, oh, why? And he doesn't mean, how are you? Oh, I want to know how you are. It's another way of saying hello. So, and I think that these are embedded kind of things that we've learned from being young. We've internalized kind of actually when people ask, are you okay? Or how are you even? That actually they don't really want to know the answer half the time, unless they're good friends. And I learned that when I was quite young from somebody telling me, actually, Essie, I wasn't asking. I just wanted to, I was saying hello. And so I think you're absolutely right, but I think that we also have to be mindful that it takes people a while to undo those kind of ingrained learnings from being young and actually to understand. And I think that's where probably you were about to come in and talk about the active listening and the kind of the paraphrasing and the summarizing and the micro expressions that help somebody understand that you actually do care about what they're saying. You're not just looking at your phone or, that's the most common thing now. You're not texting a message while somebody's telling you what a bad day they're having or where they're struggling with their work, that you actually really are there to engage in what they have to say when you're asking that question, how are you?
Yeah, and I think that maybe how are you was the wrong example before.
No, I do think it was, but I think it's a good one to jump off from.
I think the most common one that I get asked often when we are out in the world, not happening enough right now, but it is what can I help with, rather than how can I do you require assistance?
Mm-hmm.
do you
No.
require assistance? You can say yes or no and then go from there. If you have someone who is, what can I do to help? Oh, actually, no, wait, hang on, hang on.
Sorry.
I messed up a bit. When we ask a person who we perceive to need help, what can I do to help? It automatically expresses that we think this person requires our help.
Mm.
We will go to them. But actually, having a question before that is crucial, because actually you'll determine if they need assistance or not. If you ask them directly, do you require assistance? And this is the thing that happens in our lives all the time. And actually, when we talk about bias, and in this case, internalized bias, we actually, day to day, we cannot pay attention to everything all the time. We understand that. But when we are in an interview setting or meeting colleagues for the first time, or whatever it is, when we exhibit signs of inattention or micro behaviours that demonstrate we are a bit uncomfortable or demonstrate negative signs of awkwardness, has an impact on others. It does have an impact, because even though we might see those micro behaviours as insignificant, people will pick up on them, unfortunately. And actually, that can result in a much bigger issue if it's not addressed and then there. I'm going to take the example of when we actually do ask those questions and make assumptions. This can often be perceived as tension and discomfort. These can actually become distracting or trigger inner thoughts, and actually that can confirm a stereotype we previously had battered away, and maybe even cause internal turmoil, making the person doubt their abilities, and it can often impact performance in that interview. And then what can happen then? This can then become further entrenched if ensuing doubt on their internal perception of their own capabilities and their potential, and that impact can be on mental health, and well-being, and perhaps in the end result in disengagement, which is a completely, when you're feeling bad and someone confirms that feeling bad as a stereotypical concept attached to disability, for example, that disengagement isn't temporary. That disengagement is final straw, and that's difficult for a load of people. And actually, we're trying to address bias, as we're all trying to do. Everyone in their job is trying to address bias. We can address it with micro affirmations, which are key phrases and words that input positivity in a stressful situation. So, for example, if someone is clearly flustered and anxious in an interview, there is no rulebook that says you cannot say, actually, you know what, we take a breath, take some time, we have time, please restart if you want to, or please take your time with this. We can all take micro affirmations to counteract perhaps the micro behaviors we're not really aware of.
Mm.
And this can help and assist with a comfort level in a situation. And I think that's very important. And that can result in a positive ending. Maybe not getting the job, but definitely not feeling worse than you went in with, you know. And that's a little bit about the speedy kind of rendition of what I usually say, but I hope that came across like I wanted to. But the importance of reducing your own agenda in a conversation that can really help inform and engage properly.
I think you came across really well, Sarah, and I think that you summed it up really well. And I mean, lots of things I can pick, but the thing on my top of the mind is at the moment, it's, you know, as an organisation, it's a way to influence others, isn't it? So by being able to communicate and ask the right questions and actually be with somebody in an open way where they feel engaged with and welcome and secure and safe, first of all, they open up to you. They will open up to you more eventually, if not straight away. But also, even if they don't get that job, let's say it's in that recruitment, in that interview stage where you were talking about, then they can go home and say, oh, you know, I didn't get the job, but actually, you know, this sounds really weird, but the interview went really well because, you know, I could tell that the interviewer really wanted to hear what I was saying and really valued kind of my input to the questions. And actually, even after I started 6 times, they were still there to wait for me. And I feel that I said what I wanted to say, which in turn lets you as the interviewer give better feedback to that candidate because you've got a fuller picture of who that candidate is. And also then that candidate goes, you know what, I loved being interviewed by XYZ, Celebrating Disability company, because they did this. And then so other people will think, oh, I really want to apply for a job there because actually they really listen to what I have to say. I do think, you know, it does, you know, it's, I think a lot when we talk in these webinars, I think we put a lot of onus on the organisation to take responsibility, and I completely think that that's the right thing to do. I think the power is with the organisation, and the organisation should be responsible for helping people to feel valued, but that is not taking away from what the interviewee, the disabled person, the customer or whatever can do to be responsible for themselves. So if I share an experience of my own, I trained as an actress. So for the first 5-6 years of my working career, I did not have any interviews because I had auditions. And auditions are very, very different to interviews. You don't answer questions about your competency. You either are good enough or you're not good enough. So my first interview, and I'm sure, you know, it was nothing to do with the organisation, so I can say it, my first interview was with Channel 4, and it was for a residency. But what they meant by residency was not what I took it to mean. I took it to mean that they was going to give me somewhere to live. But what they meant was, you're going to work for us for 6 months. And so I went into my interview completely unprepared, asking all the wrong questions, as in like, where will I live? And how much do I get paid, rather than, you know, what would you like to see out of me, and all of those. So it was awful. It was awful, and I can't even tell you my worst point. But by communicating to the, you know, I don't think this was the organisation's fault at all. It was my fault. But, you know, knowing that some people are so underprepared for interviews, and especially as disabled people, it's harder for some disabled people to get on that work ladder of being interviewed. So they've got less experience, giving them some information about what is going to happen and how it's going to happen, so that people can better prepare themselves. I am not taking away any responsibility for the rubbishness that I was in that interview. It makes a very funny story, but, you know, that's for another podcast. But it was terrible, and I'm sure that my interviewers still talk about it now as, oh my God, do you remember when we interviewed that idiot? You know, it was that bad. But, you know, I think with that communication in that way to help somebody think through how they would like to be, you know, how they would like to come across, how they would like to be portrayed, and what's the best way of getting that out of that individual, would really help going forward for not just disabled people, but people who are coming into that interview space for the first time.
I mean, I'll use an example that I've experienced quite a bit today, and I have a speech impairment. Can we all know that now? And this has been one of the biggest barriers into getting work for myself. Not because I'm necessarily not understood by people, but the internal turmoil and anxiety that my speech impairment causes for myself, and the response to that internalizes that bias further and makes me feel like I am the one who has to break the awkwardness by making jokes about it or addressing the elephant in the room in order for that barrier not to come down and stay down. Because actually, assumptions about how intelligent you are, how you perform, you assume someone is going to perform in a way you think, they will receive a lot less attention from you than you think you're giving. And little science can be very poignant in assessing of stress and anxiety, and where language falls down because structure to me is what I'm putting focus to. And by reducing that anxiety through thoughtful, affirmative micro behaviours, we can actually reduce that level of anxiety in someone who has been impairment or even has anxiety, just by creating a level of comfort that we all need from time to time, and actually being very realistic and real with in that kind of professional dialogue and relationship, and not forgetting this person is a person and they're clearly qualified, so they got into interview. So it's difficult to address. We can do it by inputting affirmative behaviours here and there to try and mitigate the negative behaviours we might be exceeding. It's difficult because it's not something that comes overnight. It is not easy by any means. It's difficult, and we understand that, but it is a very important thing to do.
I think you're absolutely right, Sarah, and I think there's a couple of really simple examples that I can give, and you can probably give, to help people think about how uncomplicated that has to be. So, for example, you know, in an interview setting, or it doesn't actually have to be in an interview setting, but I use that because it's where the majority of people are the most anxious. Even if you are not anxious usually, you're probably going to be anxious when you're being interviewed because, you know, there's lots at stake for yourself. Confirming that, you know, when the person has finished answering the question, not jumping in too quickly so that the person feels, oh, I've talked too much, I can't say anything else. But when you're sure that the person's finished their answer for that particular question, saying thank you very much, that was really good, because I know in a lot of interview settings, people are writing things down on paper to then go back and talk to their the other panelists in the interview about later. But just looking at that person and confirming that actually you heard them and you appreciate what they said is really helpful. For example, I hire personal assistants, so I'm an employer, and I think it's really important to, especially at this time, but all the time, to tell and to show my PAs that I value their contribution and I value what they're doing, and I know that if they weren't doing what they were doing, I would not be able to do what I wanted to do. So just saying, I hope you know how much I appreciate what you did for me, or thank you very much, that was brilliant, or yum, that meal was good, or you know, sometimes that meal was really nice, but next time don't use as much salt, thank you very much. But you know, just saying things to help people understand that they have been valued and they've been heard and they've been recognized. Or, you know, for example, if you're having a conversation with your employee and perhaps it's a bit of a difficult conversation for the employee after they finish talking, I hear what you've said. Let me just briefly summarize to make sure I've got everything right before moving on. So that person understands that, first of all, they've been heard, that they've been valued, and that their point has been put across in the way that they wanted it to.
Interestingly, that reminded me actually of the type of question I forgot to mention, reflective questions.
Mm-hmm.
When you ask someone an open question and it's quite a traumatic answer, you can provide a lot of comfort by reflecting in a mindful way, and to acknowledge that you've heard them by paraphrasing it back to them after they've said it. It's not only confirming you're listening, but that you care about them. And I know that's not always possible and not always appropriate in every setting, but especially when it comes to engaging with your employees and you want to know something, because you want to make something better for someone and you appreciate any knowledge you can get, it's so important to, as I said, show their value and demonstrate empathy throughout this process.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, I think I'm mindful of the time. We have an action point for you, a takeaway. So it's a question that we want to ask you for you then not necessarily to answer straight away, to then go away and think about how you can do this. Obviously, Celebrating Disability specializes in support for disabled people, but I think that the takeaways that we give in this webinar and the webinars that we've done previously are not just relevant for disabled people, they're relevant for your entire workforce or your entire customer base. Or you know, everybody that you interact with. So we would like to ask you, how can you utilize language communication and engagement to develop your organizational approach? Now that may seem like a massive, like, oh my gosh, where do I start? But it doesn't have to be a massive kind of strategic change right at this moment. It could be small things that you could implement. A little bit about like what the examples that Sarah and I have been giving this afternoon, you know, just on a one-to-one basis, if you're a line manager or if you have colleagues that you work with, how do you engage? How can you interact with your peers to make sure the peers and the people that you line manage understand that they're being heard? How are you engaging and communicating with your customers to help them understand that their concerns are being valued and that you're actually going to act on it? So it might be simple as saying, thank you very much for your feedback. I need to talk to X, Y, and Z, but we will get back to you within a certain point. And I know sometimes, you know, quite often that's organizational standard to send those automatic emails. But if you're talking to somebody face to face or over Zoom or on a phone call, what can you do to mitigate that anxiety right now? It might not be mitigated forever, but what can you do to help that person feel as though they're heard and that you are going to move forward on what they've said? And it might be a positive. So it might be about sending an email because somebody's fed back and said, oh my gosh, your service is amazing. I'm going to tell everybody. What can you then do to email that person back and say, you know, I really appreciate your feedback. Thank you very much. Those small things make a lot of difference as well.
I mean, just to add to what you were saying there, engagement isn't just about, you know, how we say things, but actually if we allocate time, put time aside for these engagement in conversations, by allocating time and energy to ask someone how ask your reports of your employees. Okay, so well, how are we doing today? How are you coping with your job? And these are not one-off conversations. If you want to truly engage with your workforce, you have to allocate and schedule in time for that conversation and not be too busy to do that. We often we can easily forget that's important, that mindful thinking about others may be the thing we're missing in our step to a good functioning and optimal workforce and potential in performance. Because little things show you care about your workforce.
I agree. Okay, so we are at 10 to 2 at the moment. I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions that they would like us to answer. Give a few seconds or a few moments, not seconds, for people to type anything that they would like to ask. If typing is a difficulty, please raise your hand and then I can allow you to talk.
Have we got anyone? No?
Not yet. So that's good. It means that we've covered everything, Sarah. We're just brilliant. I am aware that we haven't in this session covered anything to do with terminology, which is a very different subject altogether. But if anyone has any questions around terminology that we can kind of answer in 10 minutes, then please also put that in the chat box. I will carry on talking and please interrupt me, Sarah, whilst we are waiting for any questions to be asked. I think terminology is an equally important thing to think about in this conversation. I think that the way that, as I said before, I think the way that we represent disability through our terminology really, really influences our biases and our stereotypes to what we think about a group of people in this term, celebrating, disabled people. I remember when I used to work for an organisation in the care sector, and it's not unique to the organisation I worked for, but in the care sector, there's words thrown around all over the place, like toileting and feeding and doing to, doing for, opening one's bowels, and that kind of stuff. And when I worked in the care home that I worked in, I would hear the residents of that care home echoing that terminology. So they would say, oh, can I be toileted, please? And what it does, I mean, the staff in the care home that I worked in were brilliant, but what it does, and it's impossible not to, is it dehumanizes the person and makes them into an object that needs to be done to, rather than equally supported to achieve for themselves. And when I would use the terminology, oh, you know, to make a point to the staff, oh, I'm just going to be toileted, they would laugh. And I would say, well, why are you laughing when I say it? But it's okay when you say it to this person over here. We're both human beings. We both deserve the same levels of dignity. Why are we not changing the language? And because the residents were echoing the same language, they were feeling themselves as though, not that they were vocalizing this, but they were feeling themselves as though they were a burden and a chore. Whereas if you say, oh, can you support me to do what I need to do? I mean, why announce you going to the loo anyway? That's what I always said. But if you ask to be supported to do the thing that you want to do, the onus, the empowerment is back on the individual. So back on that disabled individual. And then so that use of power is turned around again, and you remember that you're actually supporting somebody to achieve something that they want to be achieved, rather than doing something to an object that you're working with or that you've been told to do. And that's one example of how terminology can have a negative impact on the internal bias of what a person thinks about themselves, but also that unconscious bias on what everybody else thinks about a person.
And adding to that, Effie, I think what whether we internalize that care element rather than assistance, and these are two similar words but have a huge priority in today's usage, and trying to replace the word care with assistance. For some people that's preferred, and if you don't know what someone prefers, please ask.
Yeah.
What is your preference? How do you like to refer to this as? And then you know what empowers that person most, and then you utilize it. So
yeah, I agree, Sarah. We've just got a question that I'm just going to read out. So the question is: have either of you ever had pause or wait for interviewer? Sorry, I'll read it again. Have either of you ever had to pause or wait for your interviewer to give you their undivided attention? You mentioned earlier that if the interviewer seems flustered, you can tell them it's okay to take a break or to start over. Have you experienced the opposite, where the interviewer is multitasking and not really listening? Sarah, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so thank you. And unfortunately, I have a number of occasions, and I'm overtly aware that some people get uncomfortable with speech impairment in my case, and because I have a way but disclose off the bat that I prefer to be asked to repeat than be nodded at and smiled at without being heard. And I have often, I start every professional encounter with, please do not be afraid to ask me to repeat. I know it can be difficult to comprehend comprehend what I'm saying at certain points. Please do ask me to repeat. And even though I say that over and over again, people, and especially interviewers, do often directly after I have said that will ask me a question, not hear what I've said and smile and nod. Mm-hmm. And I have to actually be the one who diverts attention to actually, please do ask me to repeat. And then like, oh, okay, okay. Because actually, even though it's a reminder to ask to repeat, not everyone feels comfortable doing that, even though you tell it yourself. But it will take time. These things take time to comprehend and learn. But crucially, please do listen to instructions given if you want to be seen to be paying attention, giving someone their worth and their value.
I mean, I think as a physically disabled person who is a wheelchair user, obviously, you know, I can hide my disability in these situations. Not that I'm doing it deliberately, but, you know, I don't have to mention, because it didn't come up in conversation, that I'm disabled. And that sometimes is the case when I'm talking to a prospective interviewer, because I used to put on my form, I am physically disabled, and then I stopped putting on my CV, and then I added it again. Because before I started this business and really working in this field, I was like many other disabled people, not sure, you know, whether I should own my disability when it came to interviewing for a role or not, because I didn't know what effect it would have on my ability to get in the door to be interviewed in the first place. But there is a time before I arrive in any building where I have to say, for my own well-being, I am a wheelchair user, can I make sure that your building is wheelchair accessible? So this has happened on occasions when I've gone for an interview, and we've been talking about, you know, my experience, my qualifications, and people are very excited. And then that question comes up, and then, you know, quite, you know, a few times people backtrack and say, oh, well, you know, it's very steep and, you know, there's a ramp. And I say, well, a ramp's fine. You know, I'd prefer that to a flight of stairs. So, you know, that's great. See you then. And then, you know, I've had a few times in interviews, one specific time where I won't mention the organization, where after they'd asked me, when they started asking me the questions, they said, we know these questions are really difficult, so if you can't answer them, don't worry. And I said, well, I'm sure that's the same for every interviewee that you interview, but I'm sure I'll manage, thank you. And when I finished answering the questions, the interviewer said, oh, you did very well. I didn't think you'd get through all of these questions. And so for me, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the multitasking has not been obvious in my experience in that interview, but the multitasking is going on internally for the interviewer about, oh, she's going to let me down. Oh, I'm surprised that actually she gave me an answer. So I wonder, and I didn't get the role, and I don't think I would have wanted to work for the organization anyway, but I always wonder how much attention was being paid to me because they were busy managing their own expectations and their biases of who I was as a person. So I think this is why we talk about micro expressions. I think a lot can be given away in the micro expressions. Even when you think that you are being present in the room with somebody, if you're actually not internally, then that can show in your face. But I think also you have to really own your biases and know what those biases are so that you can mitigate them and give that person a fighting chance.
Play devil's advocate with yourself.
Yeah.
It's so important to play devil's advocate with yourself over a choice or a task where you find it, you might be biased in something. It's really key to reflect and regroup yourself before or ever talking to other people about it.
I completely agree. I am aware that we've run over by 1 minute, but I think it was worth it because I think that question was a really valuable question. So thank you very much. So as you will be aware, within the next 72 hours, I will send you the recording of this footage. I will also send you mine and Sarah's contact details in case you have any follow-up questions. And thank you very much for joining us today and steering yourself away from the sun for a little bit. I know it's been hard, but I really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you at a webinar soon. Have a really nice afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. We've got a few thank yous in the box, Sarah. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Cheers for coming.